we're going to have two more talks and presentations before finishing our day. Our next presenter is now, I believe, in the room. I just got a message from him, is Dr. Rajan Khatiwoda, and he's working a lot with built data, heritage data and intangible data, and is also using in his project Arches database and SciDoc CRM to map and digitize data that they're working with in their project. And he's been very kind enough to join us from the field. So thank you, Rajan, and it's on to you.
Hi, thank you, Azade. Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for
Okay.
joining us, Rajan. Thanks.
Thank you for organizing this workshop. Actually, I couldn't join whole part due to my field trip pressure, but
Understandably, yes. No, thank you.
Let me share
Yes,
my
you can share your screen.
screen. Do you see
Perfect.
my screen?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay, my presentation today would be rather introductory because I'm actually introducing you to the Nepal Heritage Documentation Project. Maybe not all of you know how we are working and how we are working. It's also one of the Arcadia funded projects that is operating in Nepal. And the idea of the project actually came after this massive earthquake in 2015, which kind of destroyed more than 80% of built-in heritage in Nepal, predominantly in Kathmandu Valley, but also beyond Kathmandu Valley. That is how we this was the point we conceptualized this project together with UNESCO Nepal, and Arcadia was generous to grant of initial funding from 2018 to 2020 for pilot phase, and for after our successful performance, then it was extended to 6 more years of that will run up to 2026. And what we are doing basically in the Nepal Heritage Documentation Project is making a comprehensive inventory of endangered monuments, largely predominantly endangered monuments. And we are working closely with Department of Archaeology, the government of Nepal, and also government of Nepal meet us the database that we have created in RCS platform. So for us, it is kind of interesting because the data sets we produce is also then inherited by the local authority. And of course, we also host our data sets not only into RCS platform, because RCS platform, as you all know, we don't know about sustainability, but that is why we host it to the university, Heidelberg University Library. Though it is not as functional as RCS database, but for sustainability, we host all our data sets, including visual or audio and textual data set to the university library in inventory, where it is publicly freely accessible, but searchability is in comparison to the RCS database limited. We have an export team that is operating both in Heidelberg and in Nepal, comprising of historian, Indologist, epigraphist, archaeologist, and so on. This is just to give you an example of how we work in the field. For example, one of our young archaeologists is mapping a temple plinth in the left, and one of our epigraphists is reading an inscription from around 12th century that tells about this very monument I'm just showing now. So far, we have documented 1,600 monument sites, including 6,000 plus objects, and this is from OpenStreetMap that is integrated into its ArcGIS project's ArcGIS database, and this dots indicates what we documented so far. And this is a specific place of our entire project zone. I mean, a fraction. That is in satellite map, still from Mapbox, actually. Just to give you an example, how urbanized our working site is, and also the locations of the monuments. And today I'm going to focus on two aspects of our documentation, the object documentation and textual documentation. We have been already extensively making object documentation because that falls into our current project period, but epigraphic or textual documentation does not directly fall into our scope. That is why we have made a kind of test documentation and develop a concept, but we are not extensively working on um, textual or epigraphical documentation in the current phase. And I'm now going to show you one of the examples, one of the temples from the Kathmandu Valley that is located in the next to the royal palace in the city called Lalitpur. This arrow and the dot shows where it is located in street map, Google map. And this is the temple. In the left, we have a historical photo taken around 1970s by Karl Pursa, who made a kind of preliminary documentation, our first documentation, including one or two photos and few lines of description of this monument. And then to the right, and you see the recent photo after it went several renovations. So for example, let's take it as one monument, because under the monument, we have certain categories: temples, shrines, water architecture, archaeological sites, but we do not have many archaeological sites because we mostly work on built heritage, actually. And how our data sets are designed, the frames of documentation, we have mainly 5 pillars of data sets. And first, audio and visual, meaning photographs, audio and video recordings of specific monuments that we are we are documenting. We have predominantly photographs, of course, because we have not yet implemented audio and visual integration into ArcGIS database, but we are working on that. But we have collected data sets and also stored them scientifically with metadata and everything. But at the moment, we largely work with image material. Then we have architectural pillar, where we have major drawings of a monument, meaning site plan, floor plan, and also in some cases elevations, and more importantly, location map, because it is not so easy to locate a monument in highly urbanized city like Kathmandu. And to cover the intangible aspect, we have framed social religious event, meaning we record there not only the physical structure of monument, but what is happening in the monument. Because that is unique in the setting of Kathmandu Valley, because these monuments are used in day-to-day life, because they are visited by devotees, they are visited by communities, and they are used by communities, and they are constantly repaired, renovated, and also to some extent, for example, beautified, or vice versa. In some cases, they try to make it how it was before, for example. And this we all record on the social religious events. Not only that, also, for example, daily rituals, annual rituals, processions, and also any communal association through this communal organization, if you have heard about this Gucci system in the context. And this fourth pillar, we have historical invention and historical event and past intervention. There we collect the historical information of a monument, meaning what happened with the monuments, when it was collapsed, for example, renovated, and what was offered, and when it was built, when it was modified. And we mostly base this information on textual sources, secondary literature, or inscription that are available on site, or legal and administrative documents that were produced in history and kept in archive. And all this information goes into Dhanam, this open access database based on ArcGIS. We have developed one single resource model to represent all these 5 pillars of data sets. And then subsequently, as I mentioned before, for the purpose of sustainability, it goes also to HideIcon, the repository of Heidelberg University Library, which guarantees kind of its sustainability as long as the university library exists, and it's existing since 1378. So we believe it will last longer. And today I would, as I should mention briefly, I would focus on object documentation. And here you can see our ArcGIS database structure. So we have a structure in single resource model like this. Starting with actually Google locating a monument on Google map box and a street map, then all other sorts of data also for internal purposes. For example, this data entry status, data entry history, and so on for version control. Then comes our data set identify names, and also under the names, alternative names, vernacular names, and so on, and of typology of monuments and locations, and also geo coordinates, spatial coordinates. And then descriptions we do in multilingual, in English, also in native language, to also encourage native people to use database, and also for kind of, if one may say, political strategy, meaning then there is always question why you do everything in English in Indian context. So we also give extensive history of the monument in local language. Then architectural data sets, map, plans, and drawings, and followed by a detailed description of all architectural data. Then we have monument, object, and social and religious event and historical event. For example, you can see these 2 tiny sculptures. So they are belonging to one very specific monument, and we have designed in our research model the detail data set. For example, object name, object identifier, because one monument sometimes might have more than 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 objects, and also then image, primary image, secondary images, and also metadata, short description about object, and object typology, and object measurement. If you look at this one temple in Patan, then it has multiple sculpture and also a tablet inscription. For example, in many cases, a lot of tablet inscription, and we also sometimes document the spatial struts. For example, to the extreme right, you see one of the corner struts supporting the roof. We document not only not only in the main monument file, also as an object, because it has very important history. Sometime in many cases, these temples were multiple times renovated, and what remains from the original or the history or the time of the creation of the temple is sometimes the corner stores. Then they are in many cases from the time the temple first was constructed. So they have a great historical importance. That is why we treat them in some cases, if they are special, as separate objects. And I would like to now show you a very interesting example of our object documentation is in its impact in correct social and political discourse. This was one of the sculpture we documented inside the temple I showed you just before, actually. It's a Lakshmi Narayana statue. And interestingly, this sculpture was stolen in 1970s. And through our documentation to say, then it was identified in the Dallas Museum. You can see on the right hand side in circle, it is showcased in Dallas Museum, and the left hand side is a replica of the original statue. And also then when we documented, on our floor slide plan, we also, in a major slide plan, we also record where this sculpture is actually standing or kept. And while documenting the object, for example, we document detailed information about the object. And one of the historical event in this monument was the theft of this particular image. And this theft happened, for example, in 1984. It was just stolen, and then we have the date and also source how we got this information. Then it was detected in this Dallas museum. And also what we try to incorporate is secondary literature. For example, this statue then was also recorded in one of the publication in 1989. And then once it was stolen, of course, the temple cannot be without a statue. Then a replica was made and then consecrated inside. For example, then object typology, in this case, a statue, it is a stone and it is inside the monument, and object measurement. And interestingly, once then it was detected that it is in Dallas and it was verified that this was stolen from here, then there was a repatriation campaign, and the campaign group was successful to bring it back. And once it was brought back, then there was a big discourse whether it should kept into museum or it should be reconsecrated into its original place. There were always two dialogues, of course, because some said statue travel all across the seas, then it's already impure, then one should just put it into the museum. But other group of discourse, other discourse was no, because you can always reconsecrate and bring the essence back. The other group was then more convincing. Then they decided that they reconsecrate the statue and put it back into original place. And there was a big ceremony where the community is involved, and that is interesting in case of this types of statues, because it is right of community to toss the statue as they like, because there should be no restriction on the basis of the argument that the statue gets destroyed or it gets whatever. Yeah? There would not be any other scientific or preservative argument working when it comes to the live heritage, because community then should be able, and it is their basic right, that is how it is understood, to toss the feet of this statue and to worship in the way they like. And that is why it was then restored in the in its place, and there was a huge ceremony carrying it from airport to the place it was first brought, then to the temple and consecrated. And that is how we use this database or object documentation, not only to keep as a historical record, but also to actually verify the authenticity, for example, in case of theft. And in this case, it was quite interesting that it worked out. And the second, I'll be very quick. I will be very quick now. I would like to quickly draw you to take you to epigraphical documentation. As I said in the very beginning, this epigraphical or textual documentation is not what we are now focusing, but that is what we think one should focus in parallel to monument or built-in heritage documentation. Because this epigraphical sources, textual sources, its corresponding value is equally endangered by the same reasons or causes, for example, earthquakes, urbanization, and also lack of awareness and so on. And when we talk about this documentation of epigraphical sources, because we have been so far only trained to conventional method of documentation, epigraphy means you just go to the inscription, read inscription, and then read the text and then finish. But this new idea or new method of epigraphical documentation or study in Indic context is emerging. So it means inscription is not only carrying the historical information, but it has actually multiple dimensions. For example, in this little chart, you can see what in inscription might contain, or the inscriptional text might contain. For example, it has informational identity, that is text, then artifactual identity, that is object and places, and folkloric identity, because inscription also doesn't stand alone. Then it has also relation with the social connections. And this is already discussed by Trevor Owens. And when it comes to the database, then we have some text documentation of epigraphical sources, and in text documentation, for example, we consider spatial context, artifact, text, social and religious practice and performances when it comes to the epigraphical documentation. In this very slide, for example, when we record artifactual documentation of an epigraphical sources, then what matters means the material on which it is written, and also how is the material, because material, let's say which stone, sometimes then you have to specify which stone. And then type of writing support means so it is stellar, it is tablet, or it's other form of writing support. And for example, then in artifactual documentation, a script and language and other sorts of similar data sets. And within artifactual identification also, for example, provenance and object history, because inscription, they might not be always remaining at the same place. They are sometimes relocated, they are sometimes reinstalled, for example, or destroyed and even stolen. That is why it is also worth locating the object history. For example, was it originally here or it was relocated? And if yes, then why it was relocated? Then in the context, in many cases, inscription might be relocated also because of evidential reasons. Meaning, for example, inscription records, when it comes to a temple or house or whatever, then also who donated it and what property this very monument owns actually. And the inscription can still function. For example, an inscription from 15th century can still function as a evidence to verify that this and that property was belonging to this and that temple or this and that archaeological site. And this sometimes creates problem. That's why people try to, not always, in many cases also to relocate them. And this very case, this red circle inscription was relocated from a wall niche inside. Here, the purpose was not to hide it, but actually it was lack of awareness. Then they renovated this ritual house, or agache, or sacred or accessory god house, maybe in English. And they thought then it is not of much worth, because those who renovate, who involved there, didn't know the importance of this textual source. Then they just took it out. Now it is just leaning against the kind of plinth, and in few days it might also be gone. But in this case, it's a lack of awareness. So we try to also locate the object history. And of course, physical and visual description, because this epigraphical source or stone, in this very example, stone inscription not only has text, but also it has a lot of other aspect. For example, the carvings on top, on bottom, on the margins, and so on. And it is not just beautifying the inscription, but it tells in many cases. For example, it is very important for religious history, for example, because when we talk about Kathmandu, it is a kind of religious synchronism, if one may call, because Tantric Hinduism and Tantric Buddhism are simultaneously, including Shaktism, are simultaneously practiced, and you cannot really distinguish or differentiate the one religion from other one. And when it comes to the current political scenario or social scenario, they are trying to kind of differentiate. And we don't want to go into this differentiation. For a scholarly approach, it is always very important. For example, this visual carvings of an inscription might tell us whether this site was historically Buddhist, Hindu, or Shakta, for example. That is why it is very important to record also what carvings or inscription record. And of course, it's common, it has informational identity and, for example, in this case, historical event. This very inscription I showed you, for example, list what happened from 1817 to until the time of this inscription was issued. And followed by, after this informational history, then we also record social and religious activities. As I briefly mentioned before, inscription are still fall into this live practice of Kathmandu Valley, meaning they are constantly sometimes revised. I wouldn't say constantly, but revised, beautified, reinstall, and so on, or added up. For example, sometimes text is added, and in this particular case, this inscription actually is still this descendant of this founder of the monument come to this very monument and make an annual worship, but they based on how do they do it, because their information is based on the inscription that is installed there. They know that this monument is created by their descendant, and the information is extracted from inscription, and that is why they every year come and make some ritual practices over there. And of course it has also textual aspect, and textual documentation is also equally important. But when it comes to the textual documentation, of course, we have now many standard, and one of the standards is, for example, TEI XML text edition. And one may use this for kind of machine readability and machine learning, and also for database integrity and so on. And then finally, we also then record spatial documentation, means where this inscription or epigraphical sources is at the moment located. Exactly, that is how I would finish my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Rajan.